The bride sent to wrong ranch. The little girl's whisper was too dark to repeat. Elena had been looking forward to this day for months, perhaps even years. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Her wedding dress lay neatly folded in the back seat of the car, its soft ivory fabric shimmering faintly in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. She kept glancing at it, imagining how she would walk down the aisle, how her groom would smile, and how friends and family would cheer as they celebrated the start of her new life. The journey to the ranch where the wedding was to take place had been long, but Elena did not mind. She enjoyed quiet moments in the car, with the countryside rolling past in gentle waves of green and gold. Birds flitted from tree to tree, and the smell of earth and wildflowers drifted through the open windows. It was peaceful, almost idyllic, a perfect setting for the life she had imagined with Daniel, her fiancé.
Elena checked the directions again, though she had memorized them earlier.
The paper in her hand had been written clearly, with the ranch name and a series of numbers marking the turns along the way. She repeated the instructions softly to herself, almost like a chant. Turn left at the old oak tree. Continue for 3 miles. Cross the bridge and then a right. It seemed simple enough. The road became narrower, lined with tall grasses that brushed against the car windows as she drove. A few cows grazed lazily in the fields, and a gentle breeze carried their distant lowing toward her. Elena smiled. She liked these quiet, untouched places. They reminded her of her childhood summers spent in her grandmother's village, free to roam and explore, with only nature as her companion. But as she drove further, something began to feel slightly off. The familiar landmarks described in the directions did not appear. There was no oak tree, no bridge. Instead, the road twisted unexpectedly, leading her past stretches of land that looked abandoned, with crumbling fences and dry, cracked soil. Her heart began to beat a little faster. Maybe it's just the directions, she murmured to herself, trying to calm the growing unease. I can figure it out. She turned the car onto a smaller dirt path, hoping it would lead her back on track. The path wound through fields overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, and as the trees thickened, the sun began to dip lower in the sky. Shadows stretched across the road, bending in ways that made the branches above look like reaching hands. Elena felt a shiver crawl up her spine, and she adjusted her seatbelt, gripping the wheel just a little tighter. Finally, she saw a ranch in the distance. It sat alone on a hill, a wide stretch of land around it, with fences that were missing boards and a yard that looked overgrown and untended. The house itself was large, with a steep roof and a porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. Elena slowed the car, a flicker of doubt in her mind. This did not look like the cheerful, welcoming place she had imagined. Still, she told herself to stay calm. It's just a house, she said quietly. Maybe Daniel is already inside. She parked the car near the edge of the driveway and stepped out, feeling the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes. The air was cooler here, and a faint smell of damp earth and hay drifted toward her. She clutched her bag to her chest and walked up to the porch, her heels clicking softly on the wooden planks. That was when she saw the little girl. She was standing at the edge of the porch, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, wearing a simple dress that had once been white but now looked faded and a little dirty. Her hair was tangled slightly and her eyes seemed far too large for her small face. She watched Elena silently, standing perfectly still as if frozen in place. There was something about her gaze that made Elena pause. It was not curiosity or friendliness. It was caution and fear, mixed with something else Elena could not name. "Hello?" Elena said gently, forcing a smile. "Are you? Who's here?" The little girl did not answer. Instead, she stepped forward a tiny bit, her bare feet making no sound on the wood. Then she leaned close, and in a voice barely audible, she whispered something. The words were so soft, almost swallowed by the wind, that Elena could not understand them. She leaned closer, straining to hear. The girl shook her head slightly and whispered again. It was a warning. Elena could feel it in the tone, in the tremor of the girl's voice. Her heart skipped a beat. Something in that whisper made her stomach tighten. She had the strange sense that if she understood the words, she would see a truth that was dark and unsettling. Elena's instincts told her to step back, to turn and leave, but she also felt a strange pull. She could not leave a child alone like this. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, bending down slightly to meet the girl's eyes. The girl's lips parted once more, whispering again. Again, the words were impossible to make out, but the fear in her gaze was clear. She seemed to be trying to tell Elena something important, something that could not be spoken aloud. At that moment, the door to the ranch opened. An older woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a towel. She smiled at Elena, though her eyes were sharp, too precise, as if measuring her carefully. "You must be the bride," the woman said warmly, though her tone carried a subtle edge Elena could not place. "We weren't expecting you so early, but come inside. You're safe here." Elena hesitated. The little girl stayed by the porch, still watching her silently. She seemed reluctant to leave. The atmosphere felt strange, almost heavy, as if the air itself carried secrets, but Elena forced a smile and nodded. "Thank you," she said, trying to sound cheerful, though her throat felt tight. Inside, the house was dim. Sunlight barely reached through the dusty windows, and the furniture looked old and worn. There were signs of life, certainly. Plates on the table, a kettle on the stove, but everything felt just slightly off. The floors creaked more than they should, and shadows clung to the corners of the rooms, as if they had been waiting for someone. The older woman led Elena to a sitting area and gestured for her to sit. "I'll get you some tea," she said.
"I'll get you some tea."
"You must be tired from your journey." Elena sank into the chair, her hands clutching her bag. She kept glancing toward the little girl, who had moved to the far corner of the room. The child was playing quietly with a small, worn doll, but her eyes never left Elena. Time seemed to stretch. The ticking of a clock on the wall sounded louder than usual, and Elena found herself noticing the smallest details, the way the sunlight fell across the table, the faint scratches on the floorboards, the shadows that shifted unnaturally as if they were alive. Finally, the woman returned with a cup of tea, setting it carefully in front of Elena. "Drink this," she said softly. "It will calm your nerves." Elena lifted the cup, but before she could sip, the little girl spoke again. This time her voice was a little louder, though still trembling. Elena leaned closer, trying once more to catch the words. The girl shook her head and clutched her doll tightly, almost hiding behind it. Elena realized something important. The child could not, or would not, speak the words aloud. Whatever it was too dark, too frightening. Elena's heart sank. Why had she come here? She had come expecting joy, laughter, a celebration of love, and instead, she felt a growing sense of dread. She sipped the tea slowly, trying to focus on the warmth and taste, but the unease did not fade. The little girl kept her distance, yet her presence was heavy in the room. Elena could feel it pressing against her chest, a weight she could not shake. Hours passed slowly. The sun continued to sink, and the shadows grew longer, stretching across the floor like fingers. Elena tried to think logically, to convince herself that she had simply arrived at the wrong ranch by mistake, and that Daniel would come to find her soon. Yet even as she thought this, a part of her knew that something more unsettling was at play. The little girl finally approached again, stepping lightly toward Elena. This time, she did not whisper. Instead, she pointed toward a door at the far end of the hall, her expression grave. Aylin followed the gesture with her eyes, her heart pounding. The door was closed, and behind it she could sense a silence that was almost alive. Elena did not open the door, not yet. She sat back, trying to steady her breathing, but she could not stop thinking about the child's whispers, the warning she could not hear clearly. Whatever was behind that door, whatever the little girl had tried to tell her, it felt important. Too important to ignore. Night began to fall, and the ranch took on an entirely different character. Shadows deepened, and the house felt colder, though the room itself was warm. The wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the faint smell of something unfamiliar, something ancient and hidden. Elena sat silently, holding her tea, thinking about the journey she had taken, the mistakes she might have made, and the child who had somehow known more than she did. She realized with a chill that this was no ordinary ranch, and she had not arrived there by accident. Something she could not yet name, was waiting for her. And somewhere in the quiet, the little girl's eyes held a story that was too dark to speak aloud, but Elena knew she would never forget. Elena could not sleep that night. Even as the darkness of the ranch settled around her like a heavy blanket, her mind refused to quiet. Every creak of the wooden floor, every sigh of the wind through the cracks in the old walls made her startle. She lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the little girl's gaze from earlier. She could not shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. She thought about the girl's whispers, the words she could not understand, but which carried a warning impossible to ignore. Why had the child appeared at the porch? Why had she been so cautious yet insistent? Elena did not know, but she knew one thing. She could not ignore the signs. Something about this ranch was not right. Finally, unable to bear the silence, she rose from the bed. She tiptoed to the door and peeked into the hallway. The house was dark, lit only by the pale light of the moon streaming through the windows. Shadows danced across the walls, creating shapes that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Elena shivered. She walked quietly toward the main room, hoping to find some clue, some small reassurance. The little girl was there, sitting on the worn carpet, her doll in her lap. She looked up at Elena, her large eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. There was no smile, no attempt at friendliness, only a steady, serious look that made Elena's stomach tighten. "Are you okay?" Elena asked softly, kneeling down a few feet away. "Do you need anything?" The girl shook her head slowly and pointed toward the staircase leading to the upper floors. Her hand trembled slightly, and Elena noticed a flicker of fear cross the child's face. Elena frowned. "Upstairs?" she asked. "What's up there?" The little girl shook her head again, this time opening her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. She lowered her gaze, hugging the doll closer. Elena realized that the child could not, or would not, speak the warning aloud. Whatever danger existed, it was too frightening even for her to put into words. Elena swallowed hard and stood. She knew she needed to find answers. She had come here for a wedding, expecting happiness and love. Instead, she had found an abandoned-looking ranch, a mysterious child, and a growing sense of unease. Something was wrong, and she had to understand it before it was too late. She walked slowly toward the staircase, each step creaking loudly under her weight. The little girl followed silently, staying a few steps behind. Elena felt the child's presence like a silent guide, warning her to move carefully. When she reached the top of the stairs, she paused, noticing the doors along the hallway. Each one was closed, and the shadows around them seemed unusually deep, as if hiding secrets. The first door she approached was locked. She tried the handle gently, but it did not turn. She moved to the next room, which was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she found a bedroom filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. Dust motes danced in the moonlight, and a faint smell of dampness filled the air. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. There was no sign of recent use, no personal items to indicate who had been here last. She turned to leave, but something made her pause. In the corner of the room, the little girl's eyes widened, and she pointed toward a small chest. Elena approached cautiously and lifted the lid. Inside were old letters, photographs, and small trinkets. The photographs showed families smiling in front of the ranch, people Elena did not recognize, but something about their eyes seemed familiar, almost as if they were staring directly at her, warning her silently. Elena picked up one of the letters and began to read. The handwriting was old-fashioned, careful, almost delicate, but the words carried an unmistakable tone of fear. The letter spoke of disappearances, of guests who had come to the ranch and never left. Each one ended abruptly, with sentences unfinished, leaving the reader with an uneasy feeling that something terrible had occurred. A sudden noise made Elena jump. She turned quickly, but there was nothing, only the shadows in the corners of the room. She set the letter back down, her hands trembling slightly. The little girl stepped closer, whispering again, though the words were still impossible to understand. The fear in her eyes was clear, though, and Elena realized that the child was trying to guide her, trying to protect her from whatever secrets the ranch held. Elena moved to the next room, which appeared to be a study. Old books lined the shelves, their spines cracked and faded. Blood. A large desk sat in the center, covered with papers and more letters. She walked over, feeling the weight of the history in this place pressing down on her. As she sifted through the papers, she noticed entries in a journal. The writing was frantic, detailing guests who had arrived at the ranch and then vanished without explanation. Names were listed, dates noted, and each entry ended with a sense of growing dread. The more she read, the more Elena felt the walls closing in. She wanted to leave, to run back to the safety of her car, to the world she knew. But something kept her rooted, something she could not explain. The little girl's presence was comforting in a strange way, like a small beacon in the darkness, guiding her carefully through the unknown. Hours passed as Elena explored the upper floor. Each room seemed to hold its own story, fragments of lives once lived but now lost to time. Some rooms were empty, others filled with the remnants of families who had once called this place home. The air smelled of dust and old wood, and the silence was so heavy it felt like it could crush her. Finally, she reached a door at the far end of the hallway. The little girl stood in front of it, blocking her way. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear, but also determination. She pointed to the door and whispered again, the tone urgent. Elena realized with a cold, sinking feeling that this was the room the child had been trying to warn her about all along. Elena hesitated. She did not want to know what was behind the door, yet she could not ignore the warning. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the handle. It was cold under her fingers, and she felt a strange vibration run through it, as if the door itself held some memory, some secret it had been guarding for years. Taking a deep breath, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room inside was dimly lit, with moonlight streaming through a window. There was a bed, neatly made, but the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Elena stepped inside cautiously. The little girl stayed at the doorway, her eyes never leaving Elena. As she moved further into the room, Elena noticed a small table by the window. On it lay a single photograph, unlike the others she had seen. This one was newer, and it showed a bride, much like Elena, standing in front of the ranch. Her eyes were wide with fear, her smile forced. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. It was almost as if she were looking at a reflection of herself, a warning of what could happen if she did not leave. Elena turned quickly, her pulse racing. The little girl grabbed her hand gently, guiding her back toward the hallway. There was urgency in her movements, a silent plea to leave the room and never return. Ayla nodded, understanding finally the depth of the warning the child had been trying to give. They moved quietly down the stairs together, the house around them still and watchful. Elena felt the full weight of the ranch's history pressing on her. The letters, the photographs, the empty rooms, they all told a story of fear, of danger, and of secrets hidden just out of reach. The little girl had been her only guide, her only hope of understanding the danger without being trapped in it herself. By the time they reached the main room, the first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the windows. The older woman appeared again, her expression unchanged, calm, almost too calm. Elena felt a shiver. She did not speak, knowing that words could not capture the terror and confusion she had felt. The little girl clung to her hand tightly, as if to remind her that she was not alone. Elena realized something then. She could not stay here. She had come seeking joy, celebration, and love, but she had found something entirely different, something dark, hidden, and dangerous. She needed to leave, to find the safety of the outside world, and to never forget the warning whispered by the little girl she had met on the porch. Even as she prepared to leave, Elena knew that the ranch, the little girl, and the secrets hidden within those walls would remain with her forever. She would never see the world in the same way again. Something had changed within her, a sense of caution, of awareness, of understanding that some places carry shadows that cannot be ignored. And as the sun rose, casting its first golden rays across the fields, Elena knew that she had survived the first night. But the journey ahead, of understanding, of escaping, and of uncovering the full truth, was only beginning. Elena spent the early morning hours trying to calm herself, though her mind refused to rest. The events of the previous night replayed in her thoughts. The little girl's silent warnings, the photographs, the locked doors, and the journal entries filled with fear. The ranch had changed from a destination she had anticipated with joy into a place that now felt almost alive with secrets. Every creak of the floorboards and every shifting shadow reminded her that she was not alone. By mid-morning, Elena decided she could not wait any longer. She needed answers. She had to know why the little girl had been trying to warn her and what the house had hidden from her. She dressed quickly, choosing comfort over elegance, and grabbed her bag. The little girl was already awake, sitting quietly in the corner of the main room, her doll in her lap. The child's eyes were wide and serious, but when she saw Elena, she gave a small nod, as if encouraging her to continue. Elena stepped toward the hallway, glancing around at the old furnishings that seemed to hold their own stories. The wind outside rustled through the broken fence and overgrown yard, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth, but also something she could not identify, something almost metallic in the air. She frowned, shaking the thought away. The ranch seemed normal enough in the daylight, but her instincts told her that appearances were deceiving. The little girl began to walk ahead of Elena, moving with quiet purpose toward the side of the house that Elena had not explored the night before. She followed silently, noticing details she had not seen previously. The cracked shutters, the faint footprints in the dust, and the way the sunlight lit the cobwebs in the corners. Each detail made her heart beat faster, but she pressed on, determined to discover the truth. They came to a door that Elena had not opened previously. It was plain, almost unremarkable, but the air around it felt heavy. The little girl paused and turned to Elena, her eyes wide, as if silently asking if she was ready. Elena nodded, and together they pushed the door open. Inside was a narrow hallway, darker than the rest of the house. Dust lay thick on the floor, and the walls were lined with old photographs in black frames. Each photograph depicted families, children, and brides, smiling at first glance, but something about their eyes made Elena uneasy. They seemed too still, too knowing, as if frozen in fear rather than happiness. She shivered, stepping carefully over the uneven floorboards. At the end of the hallway was another door. The little girl stopped, pointing to it with urgency. Elena's hand trembled as she reached for the handle. It was cooler than she expected, and a strange vibration seemed to run through it. She could feel her pulse quicken. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room beyond was large, with a high ceiling and a single window at the far end. Sunlight streamed through, illuminating a layer of dust that made the air appear almost solid. In the center of the room stood a trunk, old and covered with scratches. Elena approached slowly, noticing the faint smell of wood and old paper. The little girl remained at the doorway, her eyes fixed on Elena, as if urging caution. Elena lifted the trunk's lid. Inside were letters, photographs, and trinkets, much like she had seen in other rooms. But these items felt different, more recent, more immediate. She picked up a photograph of a young woman in a white dress, her eyes wide with fear, standing on the same porch where Elena had first seen the little girl. A cold wave of recognition swept through her. This was not the past. It was a warning for the present. She began to read the letters. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic, and each page detailed strange occurrences on the ranch, guests arriving and then disappearing, sounds in the night, whispers that could not be understood. The letters spoke of a child who had appeared to warn newcomers, a child who seemed to know things that no one else did. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The little girl she had met was the same child described in these letters. As she read, a soft sound drew her attention. It was coming from the corner of the room, near the window. Elena turned slowly. The little girl was standing there, pointing outside. Elena looked and saw a figure moving in the distance, a shadowy shape just beyond the fence. Her heart raced, She could not tell who or what it was, but the movement was deliberate. Watching, waiting. "Stay close," Elena whispered to the child, though the words felt almost foolish. The little girl nodded, gripping her hand tightly. Together they moved toward the window, careful to stay in the sunlight. The shadowy figure remained still, almost hidden, but Elena could feel its gaze. The ranch seemed to hold its breath along with her, the air thick with anticipation. Suddenly a noise echoed from the other side of the house. A door slamming, followed by the creak of floorboards. Elena froze. Her mind raced. Whoever, or whatever, was on the ranch was aware of her presence. She could no longer pretend that this was a simple mistake or a harmless place. Danger was real, and she had to act carefully. The little girl tugged at her hand, guiding her away from the window. They moved quickly down the hallway, trying to remain silent, but every step felt loud in the stillness of the house. Elena realized that the child was more than a warning. She was a guide. Someone who understood the dangers that Elena could not yet see. They reached the main room and Elena paused to take stock. The older woman was not in sight. The house seemed quieter than before, but the sense of being watched remained. Elena glanced at the little girl. The child's expression was serious, almost adult-like in its intensity. She pointed toward the back door, toward the open yard. Elena understood. They needed to leave the house, to get outside where there was space and visibility. She nodded and followed the child. As they stepped into the yard, the sunlight hit them fully, revealing more of the ranch than Elena had seen before. The fences were broken in several places, and the tall grass swayed as though something had recently passed through. The little girl led Elena toward a path at the edge of the property. Along the way, Elena noticed more signs. Footprints in the dirt, some fresh, some older, leading in different directions. The ranch had been a place of many arrivals, but few departures. She shivered. Every instinct told her to keep moving, to trust the child's guidance and to avoid wandering off the path. As they walked, Elena tried to make sense of the situation. Why had this child appeared? Why had she stayed? Why had she whispered warnings that could not be understood? Elena realized that the girl was the key to surviving this place. Without her guidance, Elena might never have discovered the trunk, the letters, or the history hidden in the house. The little girl stopped suddenly and turned to Elena, her eyes wide and serious. "Shh," whispered again, though Elena could not understand the words. The tone was urgent, almost pleading. Elena nodded, understanding the urgency without needing to know the exact meaning. Together they moved quickly toward a gap in the fence that led to a path through the fields. The air outside was fresher, lighter, though the shadow of the ranch still hung over them. Elena looked back at the house, its windows staring like eyes, and felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. This place had secrets that were almost alive, secrets that had waited for someone like her to arrive. They walked quickly along the path, the tall grass brushing against their legs. The little girl's hand remained in Elena's, a lifeline through the uncertainty. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound made Elena's pulse quicken, but she kept moving, trusting the child completely. Finally, they reached the edge of the property where the path opened onto a small dirt road. Elena could see trees lining the road in the distance, and for the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of hope. They were closer to leaving the ranch, to reaching safety in the world beyond. The little girl stopped and turned to Elena one last time. She whispered again, her voice soft but urgent. Elena felt the weight of the message, even though she could not hear it clearly. It was a warning, a piece of knowledge meant to guide her beyond the ranch. Elena nodded, understanding that the child had given her everything she could, guidance, protection, and the courage to continue. Elena took a deep breath and stepped onto the dirt road, the sun fully illuminating the path ahead. The little girl stayed behind for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the ranch, her figure small against the vast fields. Elena knew she would never forget this child, her quiet bravery, and the warnings that had saved her. As she walked, Elena reflected on what she had learned. The ranch was not simply a place. It was a living memory of fear, secrets, and past tragedies. The little girl had been a guide through that darkness, a reminder that even in the most frightening places, courage and trust could lead to survival. Elena's heart was still heavy, and the journey ahead remained uncertain. But she had taken the first steps beyond the shadows. She knew that the truth of the ranch, the letters and the warnings, would follow her, shaping her thoughts and her actions for a long time. But for now, she was moving forward, guided by the courage of a child who had whispered warnings too dark to speak aloud. Elena walked along the dirt road, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. Her heart still pounded from the events at the ranch. She glanced back once, but the house was already hidden behind a rise in the land. Still, the memory of its dark windows and creaking floors lingered in her mind. She hugged her bag closer, knowing that the journey was far from over. She had left the house, but she had not left the questions, the secrets, or the sense of danger. The little girl's warnings had guided her safely to the road, but Elena could not shake the feeling that she had been only partially led into the truth. Something deeper waited at that ranch, something that had not yet been revealed. The road stretched out ahead, narrow and winding, lined with trees that whispered in the morning breeze. Elena walked quickly, trying to keep up her courage. Every rustle in the bushes made her heart jump. She imagined shadows moving, shapes shifting, but she reminded herself that she was outside now, in the open air, where she could see clearly. The ranch's darkness no longer had the same hold over her, but its memory was strong.
As she walked, Elena remembered the photograph of the bride she had seen in the trunk.
Her eyes had been wide with fear, frozen in a moment of terror that mirrored the feelings Elena had experienced inside the house. Who had taken that photograph? Why had it been placed there? She did not know yet, but she sensed that there were stories still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The little girl had stayed behind, but Elena felt her presence in her mind, a reminder of the quiet courage that had guided her. She realized that the child had been more than just a warning. She had been a protector. Without her, Elena might never have discovered the letters, the photographs, or the rooms full of memories and fear. She walked with a sense of gratitude toward the child, even though the girl had already vanished behind the walls of the ranch. Elena's journey along the dirt road continued for several miles. The road eventually led to a small village with simple houses and fields stretching around them. People were moving about, tending to animals, carrying baskets, and talking quietly to one another. Elena approached cautiously, unsure if she should ask for directions or speak about what she had left behind. Finally, she stopped in front of a small shop, where an older man was arranging goods on a wooden counter. Elena approached him, trying to steady her voice. "Excuse me," she said softly.
Can you tell me the way to the nearest town? I think I may have taken the wrong path.
The man looked at her carefully, noticing the worry in her eyes. "You've come from the north, haven't you?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp. "From the old ranch?" Elena froze. The man knew about it. She nodded slowly.
Yes.
"That's right. I need to get to town, safely." The man studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're lucky to have left when you did. That place, it is not kind to those who do not understand it. You should follow the road south. It will take you to the main highway. And don't look back." Elena nodded, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "Thank you," she whispered, grateful for the direction but unsettled by the man's words. She left the shop quickly, following the road south, glancing over her shoulder only once to see the rising sun casting light on the distant fields. As she walked, she thought more about the little girl's whispers and the letters she had read. It was clear that the ranch had a long history, filled with fear, disappearances, and warnings from those who had experienced its darkness. The child had been a part of that history, a silent observer and guide who had helped others survive. Elena realized that the little girl was a living memory of the ranch's past, a reminder that some dangers are hidden beneath appearances. Hours passed as Elena continued her journey. She eventually reached the main highway, where she saw cars passing by. Her heart leapt with relief. She waited until a driver noticed her and pulled over. Explaining briefly, she asked for a ride to the nearest town. The driver nodded, and Elena climbed into the vehicle feeling a sense of safety for the first time in hours. During the ride, Elena reflected on everything that had happened. She had gone to the ranch expecting a celebration, a wedding, and happiness. Instead, she had found a place filled with history, warnings, and a child who had saved her from unseen dangers. She thought about the photographs, the letters, and the heavy silence of the house. Each detail had been a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that she had only partially solved. By the time she arrived in town, Elena was exhausted. She thanked the driver and stepped out into the small streets, crowded with people moving about their daily lives. For the first time, she felt truly in the present, in a world that was ordinary, safe, and full of light. But even in the midst of the bustling town, she knew that the ranch and the little girl would remain with her forever. She checked into a small inn, grateful for the comfort of a room with clean sheets and soft pillows. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about what she should do next. She had survived the ranch, but she knew that its history could not be ignored. She had to report it, to share the warnings, and perhaps to prevent others from entering unaware. Later that day, Elena visited the local authorities. She spoke carefully, explaining that she had arrived at the wrong location and that the ranch seemed to hold a long history of disappearances and warnings. The officers listened attentively, taking notes and asking questions.
While they were cautious and professional, Elena could see that they took her seriously.
The story she told was unusual, but it was clear that the ranch required attention. After leaving the authorities, Elena walked through the town, reflecting on her journey. She realized that she had learned something profound. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. The little girl had shown her that, guiding her when she could not see the dangers clearly. Elena felt a deep respect for the child, whose quiet bravery had saved her life. That evening, Elena returned to her inn, her mind full of thoughts and reflections. She wrote in her journal, detailing everything she had experienced. She described the house, the rooms, the letters, and the photographs. She wrote about the little girl, her whispers, and the silent warnings that had guided Elena to safety. As she wrote, she realized that the story of the ranch was bigger than herself. It was a story of courage, of warnings, and of the importance of listening even when the message is difficult to understand. Night fell, and Elena looked out of her window at the quiet streets of the town. The lights of the houses glowed softly, and the air was cool and calm. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that she was safe, but also a sense of responsibility. The ranch would remain a dark memory, but she could use her experience to help others understand the dangers of places that hide their secrets behind ordinary appearances.
As she prepared for sleep, Elena thought once more of the little girl.
She imagined the child standing on the porch of the ranch watching over those who arrived unaware. Elena smiled faintly, feeling a connection to someone who had guided her with quiet courage. She knew that the child's whispers, too dark to speak aloud, had carried a power stronger than words. An instinct, a warning, and a guide through fear. Elena closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to rest. She had faced the unknown, survived it, and learned the value of courage, trust, and attention to the signs around her. The journey had changed her, deepened her understanding of the world, and shown her that even in the darkest places, hope and guidance could appear in unexpected forms. When she awoke the next morning, Elena felt a sense of clarity. She had survived, but she had also grown stronger. She knew she would carry the memory of the ranch and the little girl with her forever. The lessons of caution, trust, and courage would guide her in all the days to come. And though the world outside the ranch was ordinary, safe, and bright, she would never forget the whispers of the child whose words had been too dark to speak aloud. Elena decided that she would return to her life, her family, and her wedding plans. But she would also share her experience carefully. She would warn others, not with fear, but with knowledge and respect for the unseen dangers that sometimes hide in plain sight. And she would always remember the little girl, who had silently guided her through the shadows, showing her that even in the darkest moments, bravery and attention could light the way. With a final glance at the morning sky, Elena felt hope and determination. She was free from the ranch, but she carried its lessons within her. The journey had ended, but the story would live on, not as a tale of terror, but as a story of courage, guidance, and the quiet strength found in unexpected places.